Hey everybody. So I've made a few videos the past couple of weeks about what's going on between Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine. And I'm planning to take a deeper dive into those issues over the next couple of weeks. I think over the past 8 years, I've talked more consistently about my concerns around Trump and Russia than almost any other topic. And it looks like for those of us who've been raising the alarm for all these years, some of our biggest concerns are taking shape right now before our eyes. So, I'm not an expert on foreign policy by any means, but it doesn't take an expert to see that Trump has been telling us for a long time that he has a special relationship with Vladimir Putin. And you don't have to be an expert to see that right now, all of Europe is talking about how the US is switching sides or appears to be switching sides. They're very concerned. So I'm concerned about all of it, and I'm infuriated by what Trump is doing in the name of the United States of America. But my main focus for all this time has been on the people in America who call themselves Christians, yet they support Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. That's what I've written about in my books, and I've made videos about this, and I just find it shocking and disgusting. And it's the perfect example, I think, of how corrupting it is to follow a corrupt leader. So Donald Trump has corrupted the consciences of a large number of his followers to the point that they now either support Putin or they at least go along with Trump's support for Putin. So in preparation for my upcoming videos about this whole thing, I'm reposting a few of my older videos just to lay the groundwork for that, because I've said quite a bit about this over the years. So this one today is one that I made just a year ago in February of 2024. And at that time, Joe Biden was still running for re-election. It seems like a long time ago. Donald Trump at that time was pressuring Congress from afar, not in office, but just as a former president, pressuring Congress to cut off aid to Ukraine. And it was despicable. And we should have seen where this was going to go when he was elected. Well, a lot of us did see. So I think this has all been so obvious for so long. But when I listen to my words from a year ago, I can't believe how far we've fallen in that 1 year. So I think the nation needs to rise up and demand that our Republican representatives grow a spine. They have the power to stop Trump from destroying 80 years of progress towards democracy. We don't have to let one increasingly insane person take our country in a direction that only a small sliver of the very worst among us want to go. So anyway, here's the video from a year ago. And you'll notice in this video, I was in kind of a funny mood at the time. I was doing this series at the time on the MAGA Christian lowerarchy. So it's part of that. But don't let the lightheartedness of my presentation fool you. This is serious stuff. So thanks for listening. Hey everybody. Before I launch into this video on the link between Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and the MAGA movement, I want to just deal with the main objection that I know I'm going to get. Donald Trump has been incredibly effective in writing off his Russian connections as a hoax. And I could spend 3 hours laying out the proof for his weird preference for Russia. But right now, we can just point to one thing. He's single-handedly killing aid to Ukraine when Ukraine most desperately needs it. He's stopping Mike Johnson from bringing an aid package to the floor of the House for a vote. And that package would pass with overwhelming bipartisan support if Johnson would just allow the vote. So we don't have to look any further than that. Donald Trump right now is helping Vladimir Putin to achieve his objectives in Ukraine. And more Ukrainians are going to die because of that. And the world is a lot less safe right now because of that. So if you're someone who still actively denies that Trump has a special affinity for Vladimir Putin, then this video isn't for you. I just don't want to waste my time trying to convince you of the obvious. I mean, you're welcome to listen in and leave your comment, but then just kind of run along to whatever corner of the internet makes you happier, because the adults are talking now. The second objection I want to get past here is that I am going to say an awful lot about how MAGA Christians support Putin. And I know that people will think I'm painting with too broad of a brush, because not all MAGA Christians support Putin. And so that's true. I just want to point that out. What we're seeing, though, is that support for Vladimir Putin in the MAGA movement has risen dramatically in recent years. So I want to show a clip here to show you what I'm talking about. Now, these people that you're going to see, I don't think they're yet the mainstream of Trump supporters, but the polls are showing that this sort of thinking is becoming much more common in the MAGA movement.
Ukraine, would it give you any pause?
I don't have a problem with Russia. I really don't. I have a problem with Ukraine. They're corrupt. I think that people are just ridiculous that they think that Putin's such this enemy. He isn't doing anything. He just wants back what was his.
But he invaded
What was his.
He invaded Ukraine,
That's fine.
killing thousands of people.
That's fine. That's fine with me.
As a veteran yourself, does it concern you at all that Russian aggression could move even beyond Ukraine?
I don't think Putin's a problem. I think Zelensky's the problem.
Why do you think Putin's not the problem? He's the one that invaded Ukraine and has killed thousands of people.
Because Putin is trying to save his country from the likes of idiots like Zelensky and the elitists.
So yeah, we need to talk about this. If you're someone who votes Republican but doesn't agree with these people, then don't help them. When you support Donald Trump, you're supporting that sort of thinking, and it's only going to go away if it's defeated, if it's repudiated. So on to the main content here now. We're today filling in the prime spot, the lowest level of the MAGA Christian lowerarchy. The MAGA Christian lowerarchy is this admittedly silly chart that I'm using as a visual aid to help me to discuss how the MAGA movement works. I know I said the adults are talking, but unfortunately my artistic skills never got past the 3rd grade, but this is the best I can do. So I'm making this chart because I'm especially focused on the role that supposed Christians play in the MAGA movement, and the threat that their movement poses not just to the country, but to the church. So I started with Donald Trump, as you can see, and then last week I added Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to the list. But they're both only on the 2nd tier, and Trump will stay on that 2nd tier for as long as he's involved in politics. Mike Johnson, on the other hand, I think he's only going to be there as long as he's useful to Donald Trump, and then suddenly, poof, he'll just be a memory. I think he'll be like one of about 32 other Mike Johnsons that we've all met, at least if you're in Minnesota like I am. And we'll have to ask, do you mean the Mike Johnson down at the hardware store that talks about birdhouses all the time? And then they'll have to say, no, I mean that smirky guy. I mean that guy that liked to roll his eyes a lot. He sold Ukraine to the Russians for Jesus. And, he tried to overthrow the government for Jesus, too. He had that big wooden hammer. And they'll say, oh, yeah, that guy. Okay, I forgot about him. Oh, well. So today we're adding someone a little bit more substantial to the list, our old friend Vladimir Putin. I saw that some of you guessed in the comments that that's where I was going with this, and you were right. So how did Putin end up in the most important spot on the list? Well, let's look at it. If you'll remember, when I started, I laid out 3 criteria for the types of people who go on this list. First, they have to at least claim to be a Christian and to be acting on behalf of Christians on some level. We're not looking for sincerity here. We're just looking for a claim to be doing what they're doing in order to protect Christianity or to advance a Christian agenda. And that's Vladimir Putin all the way. He claims to have had a religious conversion years ago, and he uses Christianity as a powerful propaganda tool to unite his followers in Russia. He's invested really a lot of energy in building up this mythology of the Russian nation as the protector of Christian civilization. And That's kind of how it works whenever leaders use religious faith to build up their power base. They hearken back to a mythical past when their nation or their tribe or their culture was shaped by whatever the dominant religion is of their people. And then they call their followers back to that mythical time. That's just a very common strategy. So what they also do, though, is they create an enemy that they can rally their people against. And of course, they'll always do all sorts of rhetoric about the enemies outside of their nation. But they also have to amplify their attacks on some enemy within. And that's why Putin often attacks the LGBTQ community. And Trump does the same thing here, of course. He's increasingly using the exact language of the enemy within our country. He's not hiding the game plan. He knows that it works with a certain type of person. My favorite quote from the past several years, one that you'll hear me repeat again and again, is from David French, when he said that too many Christians in America vote for Donald Trump so that he will hate their enemies for them. That, to me, is the MAGA Christian movement in one phrase. They support Donald Trump so he can hate their enemies for them. And that's also why a lot of traditionally minded people in Russia support Putin. Russia doesn't have nearly as many people who'd be called like church-going Christians as the United States has. But Putin's appeals to Russia as a traditionally Christian nation go deep into the Russian consciousness, and they've been effective at cementing his hold on his followers. So I'll link to this article in the video description because it's a good place to start. It's just a short article from the U.S. Air Force's Air University, and it's called "The Unexpected Theologian, The Rise of Religious Messaging in Putin's Remaking of Russian State Identity." And I think this article is a good starting place because it's written to educate our soldiers about Putin's tactics around religion. It's brief, but it hits the important points. And what I especially like is that it talks about the national security implications of Putin's religious propaganda. So that's the first reason that Putin's on the list. He claims to be a Christian, and he claims to be acting on behalf of a Christian agenda. Now, secondly, the people who make this list have to be supportive of the MAGA movement. Now, it's not that I'm saying Putin wants to make America great again. He supports all sorts of radical elements in the U.S. And one of the main ways that he's done that is by supporting the MAGA movement. It's not the only way. Our government has proven that Russian intelligence promotes pretty much any extremist movements in the U.S., especially through social media. Putin doesn't want to make America great again, but he wants to discredit American democracy, to prove that it's broken beyond repair, so that the world will look to him and his more authoritarian model of leadership. And that is where his interests align with Donald Trump's interests. Trump's outward agenda, the agenda that he shows us every day, is to destroy the credibility of every institution in America that might oppose him or might seek to hold him accountable, from the press, which he calls the enemy of the people, to the justice system, to the checks and balances built into our government. I'd go on and say to universities, to science, all of those things. So Putin is all in on Trump and the MAGA movement because they're doing Putin's work for him. We shouldn't get confused when Putin makes comments like recently when he said that he actually prefers Joe Biden. He says that sort of thing to add to the confusion and to give the most childish Trump supporters in America a talking point, to throw at the adults who are trying to just point out the obvious. So yeah, Putin will back any movement in America that'll do his work of destabilizing our democracy. And right now, I think he sees Donald Trump's MAGA movement as his golden ticket. So the third criteria for being on this chart is that these are all people who use devious or deceptive or abusive means to accomplish their agenda. And I just hope I don't have to spend time proving that that's the way Putin operates. That's the epitome of how Putin operates. So here's the interesting question for me. Why do Donald Trump and the MAGA movement admire Vladimir Putin? No one can get inside of Donald Trump's mind completely, but I think his attraction to Putin seems to be built on two things, and I think they're both important. Number one, Trump wants to benefit financially from Russia. And number two, Trump admires strong authoritarian leaders. Now, Trump's financial ties to Russia and Saudi Arabia and other autocracies are well documented, even though he's denied it for years. And again, it's part of Trump's special genius that he's been able to spin these things to such an extent that even bringing up his financial ties to Russia gets a person labeled as like buying into the Russia hoax or as having Trump derangement syndrome. But all the information is out there. You can start with the Mueller report. That's another thing that Trump successfully spun. The Mueller report didn't accuse Trump of illegality regarding his financial dealings with Russia, but it completely exposed his lies to the American people about those dealings with Russia. One of his most famous lies about his Russian financial ties was during the 2016 campaign when he insisted again and again that he had no business dealings with Russia, including having no plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. But the Mueller report showed that Trump had been negotiating with Russia all through the 2016 campaign to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. He even signed a letter of intent to do so in the middle of the campaign. So anyone with even a tiny interest in knowing the truth about the financial connections between Trump and Russia can easily find all the information you need in like reliable sources. It's not conspiracy theory stuff. It's all out there in the public record. But the bottom line about the financial stuff is that Trump lied to the American people for years about his financial ties. He got found out, and then he and his supporters did what they always do, which is to say, so what? There's nothing illegal about lying to the American people. And his Christian supporters is the part that bothers me. Go along and say, yeah, there's nothing illegal about lying. And then the bar is lowered, once again, with the blessing and the support of Christians. But the second reason Trump likes Vladimir Putin is that he's told us he admires strong authoritarian leaders. And again, I'm not going to spend hours here showing all the different things that Trump has said to support this. All of his statements are just readily available if you just go look for them. But I do want to point out that it's an ongoing thing. Just this week, Trump entertained Viktor Orban from Hungary at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, he's not hiding this stuff, and it's not Trump derangement syndrome when we point it out. I mean, you can read about Viktor Orban. Look at the praise that the American right has heaped on Viktor Orban and ask yourself, why did Trump just have this guy to Mar-a-Lago this week? It's not a secret. Trump admires authoritarians and he's learning from them and he wants us to know it. He talks about it. His admiration for these people, though, is having an effect on his own followers. Leadership matters. David Frum wrote an article in The Atlantic back in December detailing why Republicans are blocking aid to Ukraine. The article was called, "They Do It for Trump." And in that article, he says, Ukraine's expendability to congressional Republicans originates in the sinister special relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And he describes how Republicans have traditionally seen Russia as far more of a threat than Democrats did. But that's changed since Donald Trump. He writes, the urge to align with the party's new pro-Russian leader reshaped attitudes among Republican Party loyalists. From 2015 to 2017, Republican opinion shifted markedly in a pro-Russia and pro-Putin direction. In 2017, more than a third of surveyed Republicans expressed favorable views of Putin. He also talks about Tucker Carlson's support for Putin, and that could be another 3-hour video.
Because people are dying on the front lines. You think it's a joke?
Why do I care? Why do I care what's going on in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm serious. Like, why do I care?
Tell you why.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia, which I am?
Now, Tucker did get fired from Fox News, but it wasn't for saying things like that. That sort of thing was just fine with Fox News, apparently. So yes, when I ask the question, why do MAGA supporters admire Vladimir Putin? One answer has to be simply that Donald Trump and other people they respect are telling them to admire Putin. But when it comes to specifically Christian MAGA supporters, I think plenty of them would admire Putin even if Trump weren't on the scene. It all comes down again to the idea that Vladimir Putin is doing in Russia what they'd like to see happen in America. He's talking about returning Russia to its Christian roots, and he's persecuting the people they hate. As early as 2013, Pat Buchanan wrote an article called, "Is Putin One of Us?" The article talks about how Putin is waging the same sort of culture war in Russia that Buchanan favored in the United States. And it seemed like a controversial question to ask at the time, is Putin one of us? But it's become much more mainstream on the right to view Putin this way. If our whole world view is shaped by a sense that we're engaged in an existential culture war to preserve Christianity against the godless hordes, then it can start to make sense when people tell us that someone like Vladimir Putin is on our side in that war. So I could spend another 3 hours showing all the ways that conservative Christians have been increasingly identifying Vladimir Putin as an ally in their culture war against the left. And I'm sure I will in future videos. But for now, I'd recommend that we all just read more deeply on our own about this stuff because, again, it's all out there. A quick read from last month is David French's article in the New York Times, Why MAGA Loves Russia and Hates Ukraine. I also mentioned Timothy Snyder and Ann Applebaum last week because I had just read a couple of their books and it was really helpful. There's all sorts of good content out there if we just take the time to read it. I would love it if people left suggestions in the comments for good, like non-conspiratorial, non-hair on fire articles or books that would help people to get a better understanding of why so many MAGA Christians are falling for Putin and people like him. But for now, I'll just return to the MAGA Christian lowerarchy one more time. Leave a comment. What do you think about me putting Putin on there? I'm interested in your thoughts about it. So thanks for listening.